The Problems of the Reconstruction, Cameron King. The end of the Civil War and the emancipation of the slaves marked the beginning of a new era in American history. But along the way, the healing nation hit many speed bumps. The Reconstruction of the United States was a bumpy road full of disagreement and discrimination. During the war, many slaves escaped without secrecy. Most of the men who enforced rules against slaves were off fighting the Civil War. So the women, children, and elderly that were left behind feared armed slaves who wanted revenge on their former masters. But before the war was even over, Yankee military officers restored order in the South by forcing black people back onto plantations, but for some pay this time. Later, President Lincoln and his proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction, and the Congress, with their Wade Davis bill, disagreed on who should be in charge of the Reconstruction. Lincoln only asked for 10% of the Southern voters to renounce their secession in order to return to the Union, while Congress wanted half of them to renounce it. Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Virginia all met President Lincoln's conditions for return, but the Congress refused to allow them back because they did not meet the 50% standard that they had put forward. They called these four states the Lincoln States. The South desperately wanted to maintain their slave-based economic system, so they created laws that subjugated freedmen as much as possible while still calling them free. The Black Codes were laws that varied from state to state, but all put unfair and discriminatory rules on what black people could and could not do in the South. The later Jim Crow laws enforced public segregation and weren't repealed until 1965 in some places. White Southerners made sure that freedmen could only work on plantations or as domestic servants, so as to maintain a similar societal and economic order as before. This created a system in which the black people were indebted to the plantation owners and couldn't escape working for them because they couldn't pay off their debt because they weren't paid enough. After President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, his vice president Andrew Johnson became president. Johnson continued to disagree with Congress on who could reconstruct what. Johnson's plans were even more lax than Lincoln's. He let states back into the Union even when they continued to assert their right to succession, and he gave land that had been promised to freedmen back to plantation owners in order to win their favor. He vetoed bills aimed to combat the Black Codes as invasions of the states' rights. The Congress overturned his policies in 1867 and created what was called the Military Reconstruction Act. It put Union generals back in charge of the former Confederacy, and they would oversee the creation of state constitutions that allowed for equal rights and universal male suffrage. President Johnson vetoed this, but Congress overturned it with a two-thirds majority. The always stubborn Johnson started firing officials without Senate approval. This caused an impeachment hearing. After failing to be impeached by a single vote, Johnson finally calmed down and called it quits. He let the Congress finish their Reconstruction pretty much unhindered from that point forward.